All right, next up is Hana Abaza. She's the head of marketing for Shopify Plus, which, if you don't know Shopify Plus, that's the enterprise platform part of Shopify, which powers all kinds of cool things like the New York Times and other amazing billion-dollar businesses like Kylie Cosmetics. Nothing. Everyone's like, what the heck is Kylie Cosmetics? If I say that in the US, everyone laughs. Ha, ha, ha. Here, they're like, we don't know who that is. We don't know who that is. Some American thing. Hannah's actually the smartest B2B marketer that I know, not just in Canada, but I believe on the planet. And again, I think she speaks, I see her more outside of Toronto than I do in Toronto on the speaking circuit and usually on big stages. So we are very lucky to have her tonight too. So here's Hannah.
Thank you. So 2 years ago, I joined Shopify to build out the marketing function for Shopify Plus. As April said, we focus on that mid-market to enterprise segment. So you guys, this was like my dream job. It checked off all of the boxes. Was there demand for the product? Yep, tons of demand for the product. It had this palpable like market pull that you can just feel. Would we be able to hire all the people that we needed to do stuff? Yep, no problem, Hannah. Go hire all the people. No problem. Do we have budget? Yep, we have budget. We have lots and lots of budget. We're Shopify. We've got budget. Awesome. I was ready to go. I was super, super pumped about this. So I walked in 2 years ago and I was like, no problem. I've got this. 3 weeks later, this is me. 6 weeks later, and I felt like I was chasing a fucking fire hose. It was insane, and it was chaotic. And the thing that really stood out to me is at the end of the day, we had to go back to basics. Before we could start doing any of the marketing things, we had to answer that foundational question that April brought up earlier, which is how do we position Shopify Plus? So let's step back for a second. What is positioning exactly? So about a year ago, I reached out to April because, why not go to the source? And I said, hey, April, send me your best definition of positioning. So she sends me this. If marketing is about making it easy for people to find, evaluate, and buy your product, positioning is figuring out what your product is in the first place. I'm like, great, cool, I'll use that. 2 minutes later, get another email from April. Hannah, I have a way better definition of positioning for you. If marketing can polish a turd, positioning can turn turds into fertilizer. Are we sensing a theme? Does this track for everybody? Yeah, we're good? Okay. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is the brilliance of April Dunford. She can literally take shit and turn it into growth, turds into fertilizer. This is magic. So how do we actually do it? Well, April walked us through at least the beginning part of how to do it. But here is what I've noticed time after time, year after year, team after team, company after company. Here's what usually happens. Marketers walk into a room with a whiteboard. It has to have a whiteboard. They start talking in glowing adjectives and flowery terms, and they start talking about unicorns and ice cream and rainbows. And then pretty soon somebody starts puking rainbows. And then it's infectious, and the person next to them starts puking rainbows. And then marketers are really good at spreading the word, so the entire company starts talking about unicorns and ice creams and rainbows. And what you end up with is a big pile of shit that is completely meaningless to your customer. Positioning is not a thing that you make up. It is a thing that you discover by looking at the right inputs. So what are the right inputs? Well, that actually depends. It depends a little bit on your market, your business, but ultimately, you need to understand your customers and people that decided to not become your customers. You need to understand your product and the data around it, the data around any campaigns or marketing that you have been doing. You need to understand the market landscape, the competitor alternatives, as April mentioned, and you need to understand how your internal teams are dealing this. And once you've got the inputs, you can start to figure out how do you actually piece together that positioning. Now, there's lots of good questions to figure out. There's lots of frameworks to do this. I'm not going to talk about any of this because all of you are going to read April's book, which makes my job really, really, really easy up here. What I am going to talk about is that one piece that seems to trip up company after company, startup after startup. How are you different? Most of us lie to ourselves about that, right? How are you actually different? So we touched on this a little bit earlier. Most of us want to position based on product. Most of us want to differentiate based on product. The reality is, particularly in tech, at any given point in time, somebody is 6 months behind or 6 months ahead of your roadmap. Positioning on product alone is incredibly difficult. Positioning on price is also fraught with a whole bunch of issues. Really easy to become a race to the bottom. So how do you start to think about different ways to position yourself? Well, here's just one example, taking it beyond price and product. How do you differentiate based on experience? So about a year and a half ago, I moved, and I needed furniture. I wanted a chair, preferably gray, so I went to Ikea and I went to TechTO. And I basically found these two chairs that are kind of exactly the same thing, right? Like I compared them, and they were the same price. They were the same quality for the most part, same effort to assemble, probably the same number of F-bombs dropped while I'm trying to assemble the thing. But the experience is completely different, right? We've all been to Ikea. It's like a warehouse. I feel like a college student when I'm going to Ikea. TechTO is kind of like a posh living room. I feel like an adult when I'm in TechTO. Exactly the same product, completely different experience. Now, there's actually a company based in Australia called Koala, also in the same space. They have an interesting take on how they position themselves. Here's a quick video. Maybe. There we go. Thank you. Koala is positioning itself as the anti-IKEA. So about a month after that video launched, they put up this billboard outside IKEA in Sydney. So this billboard got picked up by national media in Australia, and that weekend, Koala's sales skyrocketed, right? Who says billboards don't work? I mean, I say billboards don't work, but regardless, they worked in this scenario because it was rooted in positioning that actually was resonating with the market, and messaging that was resonating with the market, in drilling into a pain point. At the end of the day, sometimes defining what you're not can be as powerful as defining what you are. So for a lot of us in the room, we're struggling with a lot of these different ideas, right? That's why we're all going to read April's book at the end of it. So how many of you have a product that does one of these three things? It either saves you time, makes you money, or saves you money, right? Pretty much everybody. Awesome. Guess what? So does everything else. You cannot use those as your differentiators, and you cannot use those as your value props. That's part of it. But those are the macro benefits. Those are too abstract. This is why there's a lot of sameness in the market. People talk about the same shit at the top of that level. It becomes meaningless to your customer. Great, so what do? We drill down, right? But if you go too far down and you talk really specific feature function, it misses the why. And you know what ends up happening? It becomes very company-centric. It's no longer about your customer, it's now about you. What you want is the space between. What you want is that area where you can combine the benefits, why it matters, articulate your differentiators in a way that's going to resonate with your customer. And as you go through the buying cycle, you calibrate whether you need to go up or down, depending on who you're talking to. So let's review. This is important. 3 takeaways. Number 1, read April's book, because she will tell you how to take poop and turn it into growth. Number 2, find the space between. This is the important part. And number 3, for the love of God, no more puking rainbows, unicorns, or ice cream. Thank you very much, guys.